Muthuswami Dikshitar's compositions are an eclectic mix of Sangeeta, Sahitya and Vedanta. Throughout his life, Dikshitar travelled extensively, visiting several Kshetras. Dikshita Kshetra Darshanam is an attempt to visit some of these Kshetras and get a glimpse into the myriad facets of Dikshitar's compositions.
Sri Vanchiam, one of the oldest shrines dedicated to Shiva as Vanchanatha Swami, on the banks of Kaveri river. Situated very close to Thiruvarur, this town has been visited by the Thevara Mudaligal, namely Jnanasambandar, Appar and Sundaramurti Swamigal. Vividly described, this Kshetram finds reference in their Thevaram compositions. Along with his consort Mangalambikai, Vanchanatha Swami blesses his devotees with longevity, prosperity and progeny. Gupta Ganga, the sacred Tirtham of this temple, is celebrated at par with the Ganga river. The temple finds its reference starting from the 8th century sacred literature. However, as of today, the architectural contributions that we see prominently in the temple are dated to 11th-12th century imperial Chola period. Further, the temple was expanded under the Vijayanagara, Nayaka and the Maratha rulers. Several inscriptions speaks about the contributions of these mighty kings in terms of money, land, jewelry and special services in the temple.
The Dikshitar Kriti on Sri Vanchiam Kshetra is Sri Vanchanatham Bhajeham in the raga Surati set to Aditala.
Tadanam tadanam tadararanam tadaram Sri Vanchanatham Bhajeham Sri Mangalama Sametam Sri Vanchanatham Bhajeham Sri Mangalama Sametam Sri Vanchanatham Bhajeham. Sri Vanchanatham Bhajeham, Sri Mangalamba Sametam. Vanchanatham, this is as a student of music, you don't come across this term, Vanchanatham, too often in compositions or kritis.
Even for a standard name of Shiva, this is very unique by any scale. Vanchai. It's an emotion, a feeling. I'm not sure if there is an exact equivalent for it in English, but it is a little of love, fondness, being very close to heart. Love that which is very subtle from outside but strong from within kinds. So the Sthala Puranam here involves a divine couple and they split over an argument. None but Mahavishnu and Mahalakshmi, and hence the word Sri Vanchiam. Sri is Mahalakshmi. So from Vaikunta, she leaves Vaikunta, she comes down to Bhulokam. Mahavishnu, after some time, he couldn't be there without her. So he follows her, comes here to Sri Vanchiam, which was then a forest of sandalwood trees and hence called Gandharanyam. He spots the Moola Lingam, which is a Swayambhu Murti, and worships him. Parameshwara, who was happy having been propitiated by Mahavishnu, blesses him to be united with Mahalakshmi again. And they both pray to Shiva here and then go back to Vaikunta.
This is interesting because in one of the earlier Kshetrams that we visited, Tirukkandamangai, the Sthala Puranam that you were talking about was the other way around.
Yes, there Mahalakshmi comes down and she prays and she has a grand wedding with Mahavishnu and they both go back to Vaikunta. It's and the other way here.
Not far from Tirukkandamangai is Sri Vanchiam.
Yes.
And here it's the other way around.
Yes. And both of these Kshetras are close to Thiruvarur, from where Dikshita hails, of course.
Muthuswami Dikshita lived for a long time, substantial time
at Thiruvarur.
So it's very likely that he would have visited these Kshetrams.
Certainly, yes.
Interestingly, Dikshita has composed not one, but at least 3 known compositions on the Sri Vanchiam
This Kshetram as such.
Yes. One is, of course, Sri Vanchanatham Bhajeham on Vanchanatha. The other 2 are on the goddess Mangalambika.
Oh yeah, here the Devi, she's called as Mangalambika because she bestows auspiciousness. She's an embodiment of auspiciousness.
Sri Mangalamba Sametam.
Oh yeah, that's there in the Pallavi.
And Muthuswami Dikshita dedicates not 1 but 2 compositions on Mangalambika of Sri Vanchiam. One is in the Kalyani Raga, Sri Mangalambike in the Khandajati Attathalam. Again, very difficult to find compositions in Attathalam. And the other one is Mangalambayai Namaste in a relatively rare raga called Malavashri. And interestingly, all these 3 compositions start from the Tarasthai. Sri Vancham. That's what I just sang.
Right.
The Kalyani Kirtanam. Sri Mangala Mangalambike. If these 2 start around the Shadjam, the Malavashri Kirtanam goes 2 notches higher and starts from the Madhyama, Tarasthai Madhyama. It's probably one of the few compositions that I've heard of, probably the only composition that I've heard of, which starts from the Tarasthai Madhyama. So, Mangalambayai Namaste. Fabulous creations of Muthuswami Dikshita. This, of course, is in Surati.
Kriti is in Surati, right?
Surati, yeah. That's right.
I always thought Angarakam is the most grand composition of Dikshita in Surati.
Undoubtedly, that is the Varakirtanam
in
Surati Ragam. There are 4 compositions of Muthuswami Dikshitars in Surati as documented in Subbarama Dikshita's Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshani. One is, of course, Angarakam. The other one is Sri Venkatagirisha Mahalokaye in Aditalam. The third is Sri Vanchanatham Bhajeham. And the fourth is Sri Balasubramanyam Bhajeham. That's also relatively rare compared to Angarakam and Sri Venkatagirisha. Interestingly, there 2 compositions. Angarakam starts from Rima. Shri Venkatagirisha Mahalokaye. That kirtanam also starts from a similar
lower octave.
The other composition, Sri Vanchanatham. Sri Vanchanatham Bhajeham starts from Shadja. And similarly, the 4th composition, Sri Balasubramanyam Bhajeham, also starts from Tarasthai Shadja.
So 4 compositions in Surati, 2 from higher octaves and 2 from the lower
octaves.
Brilliant.
Fascinating. And the way Muthuswami Dikshita has handled Surati, as documented in the Pradarshini, is also very interesting. He lists it as a Bhashanga Raga, a Bhashanga Janya Raga of Harikeda Gowda, the 28th Raganga Raga. And there is a usage, according to Subramanya Dikshita, of the Sadharana Gandhara in the Tarasthai, which we probably don't come across too often in today's context.
Sri Vanchanatham Bhajeham Sri Mangalamba Sametam Sri Vanchanatham Bhajeham Sri Mangalamba Sametam Sri Vanchanatham Sri Vanishadi Pujita Padam Sri Karakashadhika Phala Pradam Sri Karakashadhika Phala Pradam Jivesha Jagadbhedapadam Jivesha Jagadbhedapadam Jivesha Jagadbhedapadam Jivan Mukti Videhamukidam Shri Vanchanatham Bhajeham. So the Anupallavi starts from the Rishabha. The Pallavi started from the Tarasthai. Shri Vancha, that was the Pallavi. The Anupallavi starts from the Madhyasthai. Shri Vanishadi Pujita Padam. And this movement is a distinct feature in this composition. You will find a couple of other places in the Kriti where you find this movement. Shri Vanishadi Pujita Padam. Shri Kara Kashadhika Phalapradam.
So Anupallavi Dikshita flips through the pages of the Kshetra Purana again, and he goes on to elaborate other episodes where, very similar to Mahalakshmi and Mahavishnu, here Vanisha, who's Brahma, along with Vani, they both have come here. And he says Vanishadi, which means all other gods also, several of them have come here to pray at Sri Vanchiya Kshetram. The best part is this list of all other gods includes Yama, the god of death. So he has also come here.
When we entered the shrine, I remember finding that a very unique aspect of this Kshetra. So as soon as we entered the Kshetra, to our left, we found not the usual, probably a Ganapati or a Nandi.
We generally expect a Ganesha or a Nandi as soon as you enter a Shiva temple, but here
I found a Yama Sannidhi, which I found it as a really unique aspect.
Yeah, Yama is, he also faces the south, which is his direction. Yama was killed by Shiva. There is this Nigraham of Yama which happens at Tirukkadayur.
As part of the Markandeya Purana.
Yes, the Markandeya's episode, the Markandeya Purana. And much later, after Yama was, the Nigraham of Yama happened, Bhudevi, Mother Earth, she couldn't take the burden because there was no death happening. With no Yama in place, there was no death happening, and Bhuma Devi felt the burden. So she requested Shiva to come to her rescue. And understanding the problem, Shiva kind of breathed life into Yama again. And Yama was revoked and he was given back his position. But still, for whatever he did, he had to visit several Shiva Kshetrams, one of which is Sri Vanchiam. He comes here and prays to Vanchanatha Swami. And Vanchanatha, when he asked him what is his prayers were and what he wanted, Yama very interestingly says, for people who cannot actually make it up to Kashi, Varanasi, a visit to Kashi is mandate. So for people who cannot do it, who cannot afford it for various reasons, make it easy for them. Let them come here to Sri Vanchiam and let them be blessed much more than what they would be blessed if they go to Kashi. Kashi adhika palapratam. So that's how Dikshita phrases it. And Kashi is generally considered this the most sacred place. And so other temples, when you have to speak about the greatness of other temples, you compare it with Kashi and say, this is like twice that of Kashi or half of Kashi, Ardha Kashi. So you have such cases. You have 6 Kshetras, Siva Kshetras, all again like treated equivalent to Kashi. And the list includes Vanchanatha Kshetram, which is Thiruvayyar. And then you have Madhyarjunam, Thiruvidai Marudur, Mayuram, Mayavaram temple. And then you have Thiruvenkadu, Shvetaranyam, and Pallavanichwaram or Tiruchaikadu, Chayavanam, near Kaveri Pumpatnam, Pumbuhar. The 6th is Sri Vanchiam, which blesses you with more benefits than a visit to Kashi. Yes.
Kashadhika Phalapradam. Then we move on to the Madhyama Kala in the composition. And the Madhyama Kala starts with the Tarasthai Rishabha. Jivesha Jagad Bhedapaham Rima Garisa, with the Tarasthai Rishabha, Madhyama and upwards.
That's a very beautiful phrase where he quotes what Advaita philosophy is in one line. Jiva, Isha, Jagat, Bheda, Apaham. So basically, the concept of non-duality, as it is easily translated, you should come out of seeing the differences between Jiva, Jivatma, Isha, who's Paramatma, and the Jagat. So Vanchanatha, Dikshita himself being an Advaiti, he says prayers to Vanchanatha will help you come over from seeing the differences between Parameshwara, yourself, and the Jagat. So the differences are destroyed. So that's an Advaiti's way of looking at what Parajnanam is, the ultimate knowledge is. And so for someone who's attains that level of consciousness, for them, mukti is granted. When talking about Kashi, you have mukti and all that comes along. And he says both the types of mukti, which is Jivan Mukti and Videha Mukti, are possible for people who pray here at Sri Vanchiam. Jivan Mukti is, enjoying the eternal bliss, the moksha anandam, when you are alive here on this earth. And Videha Mukti is the Mukti that you get after death, after you shed your mortal coils. So Mukti is of 2 types, both of which are possible for people who pray here at Sri Vanchiam.
And then the phraseology there also is very interesting. Jivan Mukti Videha Mukti Dam Shri Vani Shadi Pujita Padam Shri Karakashadhika Phala Pradam Jivesha Jagadbhedapaham Jivan Mukti Videha Muktidam Shri Vanchanatham. Shita Kirana Ravi Pavakanetram Shri Gandharanya Kshetram. Shita Kirana Ravi Pavakanetram Shri Gandharanya Kshetram. Vibhuti Rudrakshabaranagatam Bhukailasa Sthiti Patram. Vibhuti Rudrakshabaranagatam Bhukailasa Sthiti Patram. The charanam of this composition begins with a very unique Surati phrase. Shita Kirana Ravi Pavaka Padani Zani Pama, which is very unique and very rarely found, at least in most compositions of Surati. It's probably the only instance where you find this phrase in Surati in a composition. The charanams of Dikshita in general, as a musician and as a student of music, they are lessons in terms of how to handle a raga.
I think Dikshita starts praying here. One of the most important duty of a devotee is to vividly describe the divine physique of Parameshwara So he starts with the most unique aspect of Shiva's iconography, which is of course the three-eyed face of his, the Trinetra, of which it's the sun, the moon and the fire are respectively the three eyes of Shiva. Rays, the cool rays of the moon, the fire and the sun, Ravi is also there, and Pavaka. So all these three become the eyes of Shiva, the three-eyed face of Shiva. Then he goes on to describe this Kshetram, which we just discussed. This was what was called as Gandharanya Kshetram, for the fragrance which was filled in this atmosphere, because it was a forest of sandalwood trees, according to the Puranas. Sri Gandha Aranyam. It was a forest, and the Stalavriksham is still the sandalwood tree that's seen inside in the temple campus. And he continues with his vivid description of Shiva to be the one who's spotted with the Bhasma and Rudraksha. That's like the most basic of any alankaram that a god can expect from a devotee. And Shiva is very happy with such simple alankarams and offerings. So it's just Bhasma and Rudraksha. Again, exclusive attribute of Shiva. Like the three eyes, the Bhasma and Rudraksha is very exclusive for Shiva's divine form. So Dikshita describes that and goes on to say that, well, he who's the resident of Kailasha is also here. And when the resident comes here, this also becomes a Kailasha.
And the Dvitiya Akshara Prasa is again an integral part of any composition, right? So, Shita Kiran Ravi Pavakanetram, Shri Gandharanya Kshetram, Vibhuti. So, Ta, Shita, Vibhuti, and the next line. Nirdhuta Papasina Bhairavam Dhurjatimaditya Varotsavam Nirdhuta Papasina Bhairavam Dhurjatimaditya Varotsavam Vitihotra Mrigadharam Parashivam Vigneshwara Guruguha Samudbhavam Nirthuta. You find this Atita Edupu in this composition. Vibhuti in the previous. Nirdhuta Papa. Nirdhuta Papa Sina Bhairavam.
I mean, like, there is Svaraksharam, there is Prasam. Okay, that makes it a Dikshita Kriti. Here, I think Dikshita is reminded of the Kashi equivalent that Sri Vanchiam is. So he points out to, when it is Kashi, after Vishwanatha and Annapurni, I think it's Bhairava who is the most popular deity of Kashi. So here in this temple, which is one of those Dakshina Kashis, here a very unique form of Bhairava is installed in the temple and he is worshipped. Just opposite to the shrine of Nataraja, you see a very small murti of Bhairava, but he is a yoga Bhairava. So he is seated performing meditation. He performs yoga there and he has the Jatabaram on his head. So his matted hair lock, it's tied into a Jatai there and he is seated there. So Dikshita brings in that reference, this being Kashi and Adhika Palapradam than Kashi. So he talks about Bhairava here. And another interesting fact is he's seated and because he's into yoga, you don't see his Vahana, which is the dog. So he's a yoga Bhairava.
Shwana Vahanam.
Yeah, the Shwana Vahanam is not here.
Oh.
He has, the Shwana Vahanam is missing here because he is in his yoga. And then he goes on to describe Shiva's exclusive attributes, which is the fire that he holds and the deer, the sarangam in his hand.
Vitihotra
Mrigadaram. So that's there. He holds the Agni and Vitihotra and the Mrigam. So that's there again that Shiva holds. And so it is again the Charanam, the second part of Charanam also describes all the attributes of Shiva. Finally, he brings in the Vagyakara Mudra, the Guruguha Mudra is brought in. He says Ganapati and Subramanya, Ganesha and Guruguha, and it is from Shiva that they both came out. So they are basically Shiva Tattva, a little less than Paripurna Shiva, Parashiva. So he is Parashiva, from him Samudbhavam. These two murtis came from Shiva. They are just a little less of Parashiva. Parashiva is of course Vanchanatha. Quite interestingly, the Shaiva Agamas suggest that as you walk into a Shiva temple, every entrance to each of the corridor, all the entrances should have a shrine for Ganesha and Subramanya on either sides. It is there in many temples, but here it is very characteristic. Each of the entrance has a separate shrine. And so the Ganesha Guruguha Samudbhavam is there. So you, as you go in, you're reminded of this particular phrase in the Charanam, as you see each of the entrance having separate shrines for Ganesha and Subramanya on either sides. And finally you have Parashiva seated in the Sanctum Sanctorum as Vanchanatha Swami.
Fascinating. And the Charanam also has many unique musical phrases for Surati. Surati is a relatively popular raga. Despite that, you find several unique phrases that Dikshita unearths and presents in this composition. Probably he presents an older form of Surati maybe. But as we see it in the Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshini, we find several interesting phrases. Nirdut Danip. You don't find that very often in Surati. So it's interesting how Dikshita weaves in unique musical phrases, unique aspects of the Kshetram with such detail.
With lyrical beauty also.
Bhudavadim Bhavasagara Bhusurati Kadidita Bhavam Padagakarana Nipuna Munitirtha Prabhavam Prakriti Swabhavam Sri Vanchanatham Bhajeham.
The Madhyamakala Sahitya of Dikshitars is a separate study by itself, I'm sure. I mean, you take any aspect of Dikshitars, it lends itself to a PhD thesis of sorts.
The Charanam is, the musical, the non-musical aspects.
Fascinating.
It just goes.
So the Madhyamakala characteristically goes to the Tarasthai. Bhudavadim Bhavasagaranam. And then the Ragamudra comes. So Bhutapatim Bhavasagaranam.
I think Dikshita continues to enlist all the most unique aspects of Shiva. So he starts with the three-eyed nature, and then he sings about the Jatabaram, and then he sings about how it is from Shiva the Samudbhava of Ganesha and Guruguha happened. And now the most important aspect, he is Bhutapati. All the Bhuta Ganas, they are so closely associated with Shiva. In fact, when the Samhara happens, when even Devi, Parvati herself, she dissolves within the divine physique of Shiva, the Ganas are there around him. They are inseparable actually. So they are the most, they are always in close proximity to Shiva. Wherever Shiva goes, they accompany him. And so Bhutapati, that's another unique tag for Shiva, Bhutapatim. And he is the one who helps us cross the mighty ocean of samsara. Bhavasagara Navam. He's called a ship who helps us cross. And that's like many ancient texts from the Vedas and several metaphorical references uses Shiva as a ship, mentions Shiva as a ship which helps us cross the mighty ocean of samsara. So, Bhavasagara Navam he is called.
But the Ragamudra, Surati.
Oh yeah, that is there too.
The way Bhu Surati ka Didita Navam, I can make out the word Surati there, but how he weaves it in.
Bhusuras, Suras are the celestials. Bhusuras are people who are like the celestials but here in Bhuloka. The most learned scholars. They are so learned that they can actually author commentaries on Vedic literature. So,
that's Tika.
Tika is basically commentaries. So they have authored commentaries on the Bhusuras, have authored Tikas, Bhusura.
Bhusura plus Tika Didita Bhavam.
Yes. So they've been blessed by Vanchanatha. And imagine a place like the Kaveri Delta, especially Dikshitar's time, 19th century, 18th, 19th century, till even the last century. You had so many scholars. Every village had like dozens of scholars who had in-depth knowledge starting from the Vedas, the Upanishads, so many Pauranikas. So they were all probably the best among the scholars who could dwell deep into it, and they were so scholarly that they could actually comment on the Vedic scriptures. So I think Dikshita was probably reminded of such scholars who've been blessed by Vanchanatha, so he brings them in, and there very cleverly he brings in the Ragamudrai also. Then he moves on to say, for people who come here to Sri Vanchiam, fall at the lotus feet of Vanchanatha, you have the Gupta Ganga or the Muni Tirtham as it is called. In the Anupallavi, Dikshita says Vanchanatha was worshipped by Vanisha, and several others. Vani, Shadhi, that's how it goes.
So Brahma.
It has Brahma, it has Saraswati, it has Mahavishnu, Mahalakshmi, Ganesha, Subramanya, Bhairava, Ganga, and also Aditya, Surya. Surya has come here. And for having attended Daksha Yagam, Surya was punished. And to get over that punishment and get back to Surya Mandalam, Vanchiam, Sri Vanchiam was the suggested place. So he comes here. All the 5 Sundays of the month of Kartikeya, which is mid-November to mid-December, has a festive look here. All the 5 Sundays, and the last one is the most important. When it is believed that this Tirtham, which is called as Muni Tirtham or Gupta Gangai, this is believed to have the power or the sanctity of Ganga to come here. So
that is the Muni Tirtha Prabhavam.
Prabhavam.
The Gupta Ganga, since you mentioned it, comes in the Malavashri Kirtanam.
On Mangalambika. So the Tirtham is also called as Muni Tirtham, but Gupta Ganga is the regular name. And on that day, the 5th Sunday of the month of Kartikeya, believe that the sanctity of Ganga comes here. So for people who cannot actually go up to Kashi and do a Ganga Snanam, can come here to Sri Vanchiam on the 5th Sunday of the month of Kartikeya, be a part of the celebrations, the festivals that happens here, and also take a dip in
so that
the
is
Gupta
Aditya
Gangai.
Varotsavam.
Aditya Varotsavam, that is also referred in the Charanam in the composition. So Muni Tirtha Prabhavam and Aditya Varotsavam are like together, they happen together. And finally, Dikshita says, well, after having enlisted all this, he says, Prakriti Swabhavam. He is the ultimate. He starts the composition with the name of Parashiva in this Kshetra as Sri Vanchanatham. Finally, he concludes it saying and calling him as Prakriti Swabhavam, the one who is his divine physique has the complete universe in it.
Much like the universe of Muthuswami Dikshita's compositions, which cover aspects of the Kshetra, aspects of the Raga, the lyrical beauty, the musical phrases, the
festivities,
phraseology, the festivities, the
iconographies, whatnot.
I think this journey into these compositions of Dikshita's is a blissful and an endless one.
Probably similar to his journey to Kshetras, from one to another, and soaking himself so deep into the specifications and the common aspects, the Vedic influence, the agamic notes, everything. So it's a never-ending journey for him, and I think learning the compositions are a never-ending journey too.
Sthiti Patram Nidhuta Papasina Bhairavam Gurjati Maditya Varotsavam Niti Gotra Mrigadharam Parashivam Vigneshwara Guruguhaamrtam Bhutapatim Bhavasagaravam Surati Kadidita Bhavam Patakaharana Nipuna Muni Tirtha Prabhavam Prakriti Swabhavam Sri Vanchanatham